Старики говорили, что это ворота в ад, и запрещали нам туда ходить. Мы стали находить там вновь и вновь. Но многие из нас не знали, что это такое.
Deep in the cold heart of Siberia, the earth is unraveling. The men are looking down into a mega slump. A giant collapse of ground that was once frozen. A disturbing sound emerges from the deep. It is the sound of climate change. Arctic nomads are heading inland with their herds of reindeer. The Nenets' coastal pastures are buried under snow. Journeys are arduous. However, it is what they do and have always done. Their migration between summer and winter pastures follows the seasons. At the banks of Russia's Ob River, everything comes to a sudden standstill. Its estuary is several kilometers wide, and they have to get across it. The chiefs are skeptical. Will the ice carry them? Winters here are growing warmer from one year to the next. Climate change has reached the Nenets and their herds. It is as though their land were running a fever. Leonid Serateto is the most experienced member of the clan. He checks the ice sheet along the riverbank again and again, looking for a safe passage to cross. It's a harrowing and dangerous mission. It was only a few years ago that there was no danger of the ice breaking when the herds crossed the river.
It's no more than 25 centimeters. All the rivers and lakes are freezing over a month later than they used to. There's a huge difference when you compare it to the 80s and 90s. We're a month late. A whole month. We really need to cross over in November, but now it doesn't look as though we'll make it until December.
25 centimeters is too thin. The ice could break under the weight of almost 1,000 reindeers. There's only one solution: to set up camp and wait. It's minus 10 degrees. For a safe layer of ice to build, they need the temperature to go down to at least minus 30 for several days. The Nenets don't have much in the way of possessions. Their tent, the tomb, and all their other belongings fit onto a few sleighs. Alexander Volkovitsky has been conducting research on the life of the Nenets for many years.
In a normal situation, it's like a good turnover of all these families, all these brigades, and they are one by one crossing the Ob River. If there is no ice on it, of course they have to stay, to wait, and lots of problems connected with it. Not only reindeer grazing pastures, they have to watch their herds, they have to protect them from mixing, and it's a very hard period for them.
New groups arrive and join the people waiting. The animals are nervous. For several hours, the men tried to restore order and separate the herds. The reindeers are the Nenets' most valuable possession. They are the family's life insurance. A sense of exhaustion and frustration spreads over the camp. They urgently need to move on now. There is hardly anything left for the animals to feed on. Nomads used to travel around the whole of the tundra with no limitations. But now they are trapped in the huge expanse of snow.
In the 80s, the hard frosts came in November, minus 30 degrees. But recently there have been more and more warm periods. It's good if we even get down to minus 20, for example. But now it's only minus 9. And for Monday, the forecast is only minus 3.
Changes in Arctic Russia has put the international scientific community into a state of high alert. Alexander Volkovitsky is on the way to a conference attended by climate researchers from all corners of the world.
We usually think about reindeer, but of course rodents.
The frozen ground of Siberia, the permafrost, is essential to the understanding of climate change as a whole.
Ecosystem, yeah.
We'll expect
Almost half of the entire North Polar region belongs to Russia. However, information from this enormous area is scarce.
Siberia is very important for permafrost research because more than half of the permafrost is in Siberia. And any conclusions or understanding what permafrost, how permafrost is changing now will be not complete without information from Siberia.
Siberia is a continent within a continent, an enormous wilderness. Within the midst of the untouched landscape, the earth is in motion.
The elders always talked about here as a mysterious place. Sometimes, they say, lights like ghosts flicker and fluctuate down below.
A huge abyss has opened up, a crater over a kilometre long.
There was no hole here in earlier times, but then the earth started to open up and water from the deep flushed the frozen soil away.
The two men are bone hunters, Siberia's soldiers of fortune. The thawing process brings to light organic material that is thousands of years old.
A lot of bones have been found here. Most of them were tusks, or bones from bisons, even some from a rhinoceros, but that was only once. After that, nobody ever uncovered rhino bones again. Tusks were found here, but not complete ones, only pieces. And then there were the vertebrae, and something like a head, and bone fragments. The tusks can weigh around 60 to 65 kilos, sometimes even 70. And 3 years ago, a small, well-preserved primeval foal was found. It still even had flesh and fur on it.
The problem is not only that the ancient bones are thawing in Siberia's permafrost soil. Other organic material, including hides and the remains of flesh that has been preserved for 20, 50, or 100,000 years, is now being unearthed and entering the world of today. Analyzing these substances, researchers have made discoveries that are both exciting and disturbing.
Well, this is really a new type of a new life form. This is a giant virus from Siberia that was actually formed 30,000 years ago. And this thing is probably 20 times larger in length, which makes the whole thing 8,000 times bigger in terms of volume than a regular virus, which is amazing when you think that this virus is actually now alive and well in our laboratory. The permafrost in the Arctic is melting, is thawing, we say technically, and so many things that are in the permafrost, even very ancient permafrost, are now released on present Earth. And so if there are some of those viruses which are pathogenic to human, animal, or plants are still live, are still infectious, then we have a real risk with permafrost melting.
The real danger this represents suddenly became clear in 2016. On the Ural Peninsula, reindeer and then nomads became ill. A task force had to take control when the first person died.
And this is the spot of potentially risky territories on which the anthrax was described in 2016. It was a huge catastrophe for the whole reindeer herding at Ural, and now anthrax reached the Ural Peninsula.
There was a verdict of specialists who said that the probes showed that it was the anthrax. The serious disease, very dangerous to animals, to people, and something should be done immediately.
Anthrax is highly infectious. It can lead to death due to multiple organ failure within just a few days. The entire region was cordoned off to contain the epidemic.
The purpose was to destroy, but there are different ideas even in science. What's the best way in such a situation? Whether we should make a special, I should say, biological holes, like a biological graves for this infected material, or better simply to, well, burn it as strong as possible. A year later, in 2017, they made special probe on a certain place of burning of a certain carcass of infected reindeer. And the analysis showed that we have a very high concentration of the spores, active spores of anthrax on that place. So we may say for sure that this area of tundra is infected, and of course there is, well, it is closed now.
However, this is only the beginning.
But now we are totally changing dimensions here, because now we are talking about 35,000 years, and those are viruses. With viruses, and especially new viruses, you know, when you have the flu or when you get any kind of disease that is a viral disease, it's more difficult to treat. And so for some of them, we don't have any treatment. Okay? So now we have a problem which is 35,000 years old. We don't know what was there. That was Neanderthal. that was other people there, that was other animals, so we don't know which kind of species this virus was actually infecting, okay? And also this virus could be totally unknown, okay? The risk is we are totally confronted to new viruses, we know nothing about it, and also very old virus for which our immune system, for example, has absolutely no protection because our species has never seen this kind of virus before.
The hazards that emerge from the ice are very real. Arctic warming is progressing at a much faster pace than originally ever conceived. Changes in ocean currents and winds speed up the thawing process, triggering further chain reactions that are difficult to gauge. A team of Russian wildlife biologists is on its way to a group of remote islands in the Kara Sea. Arctic wildlife often responds quickly to environmental changes, providing an early warning that something is wrong. And there is something wrong with the ivory gulls on Uidinenia Island. Ivory gulls live only in high Arctic regions and generally breed on flat gravel plains along the edges of glaciers. For years, Maria Gavrillo and her team have been mapping all the breeding colonies. They have discovered that there has been a sharp decline in the ivory gull numbers, but up to now they have been unable to find an explanation. The biologists examine all known breeding sites on the islands of the Arctic Ocean. It is a massive undertaking in this vast Arctic wilderness. Many colonies have been deserted, like this one near an old weather station. The scientists find that although the colony has significantly diminished, there are still a few gulls left. The gulls have completely changed their breeding behavior, seeking out raised areas. Ground breeders have become roof breeders. As far as anyone knows, the birds have never behaved like this before. The scientists wonder whether the gulls would still be breeding in this area if the deserted buildings hadn't been there.
If the colony breeds successfully, the gulls will always return to the same place. But now, the situation is different.
Maria has a hunch. It seems to her that the gulls are probably avoiding predators.
As we all know, polar bears rely heavily on sea ice. Because the ice is melting earlier, polar bears are stranded on the islands. They're faced with a dilemma, desperately in search of prey. They end up in a colony of 2,000 gulls, eating virtually everything they can find close to the ground. Eggs, fledglings, everything. If this kind of thing continues to happen, the gulls will abandon the breeding ground and the colony. It looks to me as though the birds are going up onto the roofs to avoid the bears.
The shrinkage of sea ice is evidently making one species push another towards extinction as it fights for survival. Compact sea ice is vital for polar bears. They can only hunt seals, their most important prey, from an elevated position on the ice floes. The ice is melting earlier in the spring and reappearing later in the autumn. The polar bears are trapped on dry land for longer periods. Driven by hunger, they move around in search of food. Gull eggs and fledglings are far too low energy for polar bears, but if there is no alternative, ground breeders are a welcome prey. Under the extreme conditions of the Arctic, there is a very fine line between life and death. If the prevailing conditions collapse, it becomes a question of mere survival. Individual bears somehow manage to survive until the sea ice reappears. Others take risks, covering enormous distances. Turning up in places where they have never ventured before.
А это Мишка. Ну ладно.
We can only guess how this bear might have lost its way and ended up here. The industrial town of Norilsk is almost 100 miles away from the coast. Polar bears have never been seen here before. In the summer of 2019, the bear wandered around the Russian mining town for days. The animal was emaciated and exhausted. Even if a bear like this one should find its way back to the coast, it is likely that it will face a sea that is much too warm, with no pack ice in sight. Caught between two worlds, it has little chance of survival in either. The warming of the Arctic coastline radiates inland. No human has ever lived here, and yet there is a problem. The canyons of Puturana are located on a main migration route for wild reindeer. Russia's largest herds once passed along here twice a year. They headed north to the tundra in summer and then back to the taiga in the late autumn. Reindeer have migrated along these frozen valley floors for thousands of years. However, the rivers are melting earlier and earlier, from year to year. This has serious consequences for the animals. Long detours use up a lot of precious energy, and increasingly often they have to cross thin ice. Their migration has become a race against the early thaw. Many sections of the route are already underwater. The canyons will soon be completely impassable. When Puturana thaws, it is a force to be reckoned with. Just a short time ago, there were ice roads here. And now, powerful masses of water thunder down to the tundra. Here, spring is well advanced. The herds reach the plains exhausted from the many detours they have taken. They have lost precious time. Many of the females have already given birth to young. But the summer pastures are still hundreds of kilometers away. The lakes and rivers in the lowlands are already completely free of ice. There is no end to the complications the exhausted reindeer face. Their journey is fast turning into an obstacle race. In a normal year, most offspring will make this trip in the safety of the womb. Most of the young will be born once the herd has reached the summer pastures. Patterns of reindeer migration that have developed over thousands of years are being thrown off balance. Regardless, the reindeer's instinct drives them ever onwards. Old survival strategies suddenly lead them headlong into danger. If their environment changes too quickly, even common species can be pushed to the brink of extinction in next to no time. The Arctic seasons are losing their equilibrium. One reason for this imbalance is literally in the air. Siberia is considered to be the green lung of the north. Yakutia large forest alone absorbs a large proportion of global carbon dioxide emissions and produces oxygen.
Yakutia is a very special place for the permafrost. In the worldwide point of view, here is a very continuous permafrost and a very deep permafrost.
The active soil layer is ice-free in the summer, and the tree roots are shallow.
We are measuring the soil structure profile in the active layer, and we also measuring soil temperature.
Using this method, the Japanese team now records the humidity of the woodland soil.
And the permafrost, as you know, due to the global warming, the shallow permafrost layer will be thawing, and the ground ice will melt. So we have a change of active layer. And soil moisture content in the active layer, we don't know in future whether the drier active layer will be drier or wetter.
It's a simple question, but a vital one.
If we compare the data set from in previous year or previous 10 years data, then we found the active layer depths getting deeper and deeper, and the shallow soil layer becoming warmer and warmer.
Like an enormous sponge, taiga soils retain huge amounts of moisture during the summer months. If they dry out, they lose their storage capacity. And if, on top of this, there is no rain, the water balance of the whole region will be in serious trouble. In the summer of 2019, almost the whole of Yakutia experienced a record low in its water levels. Rivers like the Olenyok, which is 10 times as long as the Thames, turned into minute rivulets and almost dried up. This even got in the way of scientific research. A team of Yakut biologists is out searching for a subspecies of wild reindeer. Their search takes them deep into the Siberian forests, which can only be reached via boat along the rivers. There is no other way of traveling to their destination, and now even a light metal boat like this one runs aground. The only way to proceed is on foot, using muscle power. The men's goal is to fit satellite collars to forest reindeer. These subspecies live in the Central Siberian taiga. The biologists suspect that the animals pass through here on their way to their winter quarters in the south.
Because it has hardly rained this year, there's not much water in the Olenyok. This means the reindeer have many different routes to choose from. The deeper parts are only here, and we have a good view of them in both directions.
A waiting game in the Siberian summer. Forest reindeer move in smaller groups than their relatives in the north. The animals usually cross the river alone. Wild forest reindeer do not live in the open country and therefore are more difficult to spot. The men are in search of specimens with large antlers. Everything then has to happen quickly. Their method may seem a little rough, but it works. Every move is perfect. They screw the collar together at the ends, but it has a predetermined breaking point. It will fall off on its own after about a year. The animal's traumatic experience is over quickly. It is spared the side effects of anesthesia. In spite of a few isolated successes, the biologists are unable to complete their mission. The extremely low water level prevents them from continuing their search. Researchers whose work could help determine the effects of climate change are being held up by the effects themselves. It has never been so dry here. If parts of Siberia turn into deserts, there will be harsh consequences for the world climate. The drying up of the taiga and its rivers alone would have disastrous effects. Forests dry as tinder are highly flammable, and thunderstorms with dry lightning have been on the increase for years. In the summer of 2019, Siberia went down under gigantic clouds of smoke. The fires spread rapidly. The only thing the special task forces could do was to try and keep the fires away from the settlements. The fire sources spread over an area as large as Australia. A situation like this is beyond all control. 2019 became a year of fire disasters in Siberia. Over 5 million hectares of forests were in flames, more than ever has been recorded. Any attempt to extinguish the fire in this enormous area was like a mere drop in the ocean. Fires are nothing unusual in Siberia, but no one knows how it will ultimately affect forest ecosystems if they break out as frequently as this. The effects for the climate are indeterminable. While Central Siberia buckles under forest fires, the cold steppes around the Arctic Circle are receiving more precipitation than they used to. In the northern Urals, the nomads do not take long to respond. The grazing grounds yield more than ever before. They delay their departure to their winter quarters by several weeks. The longer the animals can feed here, the better they will withstand the winter. Few people on Earth are as reliant on the whims of nature as the Nordic tribes of Russia. The Nenets, Komi, Evenks and Chukchi are all extremely dependent on their environment. They barely think of anything as abstract as the climate. What counts for them is the weather on a daily basis. At the moment, it brings them rain more often than snow. But with 1 or 2 more reindeer pulling the sleigh, they can still get by. Yuri is Russian and a trained geologist. There is hardly anyone who knows the polar Urals better than he does. He gave up his job in science. He can no longer earn a living from his former special subject, the frozen soil patterns of the mountain tundra. He has held on to his archaic tundra buggy. He can still get anywhere with it, even though the slopes are sinking into the mud and the tundra is turning into bush. For the Nenets, Yuri is a link to the outside world. They meet up every couple of weeks for a little exchange in the middle of nowhere. Fresh reindeer meat, hides, or velvet antlers are the goods they have to offer. In exchange, they receive useful sustenance to take the edge off the arduous life of a shepherd. Yuri has lived in the Arctic Circle for over 40 years. Although he no longer works as a geologist, he witnesses climate change in a way that few other people can. The appearance of the Arctic is changing right before his very eyes.
Everything is in flux, everything is changing. The rivers are changing their courses, brooks are drying out, there is less snow. Nature as a whole is reshaping itself. The vegetation is getting higher and new plants that never grew here before. Where will it all lead to? The future will show us. Mind you, 40 years is not a very long time in comparison with a century. And even in that time, you can see all these changes happening. What does it mean on a global scale if you experience changes like this in a matter of just 40 years?
Treeless tundra is growing up and turning into a kind of polar savanna. But what about the changes that are not immediately visible? Like an organic time bomb smouldering in the thawing permafrost of the Russian Arctic. A bomb that is not so easy to defuse. Roman Petrov from the Permafrost Institute in Yakutsk takes regular air samples above the taiga.
I'm in charge of air sampling. We choose this area because we don't have big plants and the footprint of people here is low. It's a perfect condition to investigate the greenhouse gases in natural environment such a taiga zone.
The researcher flies over the test region several times a year. Here, far away from any industrial emissions, one would expect the atmosphere to have a largely natural composition. But invisible as it is, what Roman is collecting here in his bottles has an explosive message. It affects not only Siberia, but the atmosphere of the entire globe.
So far, we figure out that concentration of greenhouse gases is rising due to the permafrost degradation. Especially in case of tundra, we can see that concentration of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane is rising every year.
Siberia's permafrost consists of organic layers from many thousands of years of the Earth's history. If they thaw, the world will have a problem, and they are thawing quickly. In the summer of 2014, strange bulges appeared for the first time in the Ural tundra. There were rumors of eruptions and shooting flames. In the meantime, we know for sure that this was caused by methane pushing its way upwards. This is the strongest greenhouse gas we know of. More than 300 of these craters have appeared up to now, and the numbers are growing.
If climate warming will continue at the same rate like it was happening during the last 30 years, by the end of the century, I would say 75%, even more, of permafrost will be thawing in Siberia. Permafrost now contains about twice more carbon than it is in the atmosphere. If part of this carbon will be released into the atmosphere in the form of CO2 or especially methane, then the climate warming will accelerate. Why we cannot come back? Because the amount of ice was sequestered, the amount of carbon was sequestered in permafrost required thousands and tens of thousands of years. So everything melting now, ice, and releasing organic material is, you cannot put it back in, say, 100 years of time frame. It will need a new ice age to put all this material back. So too long for humans.
The point of no return has arrived for the nomads at the River Ob. For more than 2 weeks, they have been waiting for lower temperatures.
In the past, we would have been at the other side much earlier. It would have been -40, -35 degrees. Our fathers and forefathers crossed over here, just as we will cross over. It is really scary when the first person sets foot on the ice. When he drives the herd on, a fog will often come up and you lose sight of the animals. And then you ask yourself, where are you driving them to? Will the ice break underneath them? Or won't it?
That eerie sound is something the Nenets will have to get used to. Finally, they dare to make a move. They drive their reindeer onto the thin ice. The Nenets are already experiencing consequences that the people who caused the climate change will face in the future. They have to make a choice between two decisions, neither of which is attractive. What it means for them is this: either the animals will starve or they will drown. The herd feels its way along the banks. Here the ice is solid right through to the riverbed, so there is no danger of it breaking. The time has come. Upon a signal, they turn onto the river. As Kudi predicted, the herd fades into the twilight of the polar night. The Russian Arctic is a melting pot of climate change. An area larger than Australia is undergoing a radical change. It is thawing on the land, in the sea, and deep down in the earth. Currently, scientists only understand selected phenomena. The metabolism of this huge Arctic organism is too complex. This much is clear. The change is gathering speed, and it seems to have reached the point of no return. In the Russian Arctic, Pandora's box has been opened. The inhabitants, both humans and animals, are already up to their necks in water. But not all of them see themselves as being on the losing side. In August 2019, an expedition of the Russian Navy crossed the Arctic Ocean and came across 5 islands that were previously unknown. Freshly thawed virgin territory. It was buried under the glaciers for thousands of years. As the ice melts, the largest state on Earth is getting a fraction larger. No human being has ever set foot on this land before. Taking possession of it is a little reminiscent of the first men landing on the moon.
Mission complete. Все.
We still have no idea what kind of world the climate change in the Russian north is leading to. One thing is certain: nothing will remain as it was before.